The Nexus combat arena floated serenely in the void between three star systems, a testament to galactic engineering, and an even greater testament to the universal appeal of watching things get punched very, very hard. Its crystalline walls curved upward like a cosmic snow globe, except instead of fake snow, it contained enough violence to power a small moon and twice as much questionable betting. Inside this monument to organized brutality, representatives from 47 different species had gathered to witness what they collectively assumed would be the shortest fight in arena history. The air practically vibrated with anticipatory chatter in 17 different languages, most of which translated roughly to "this is going to be hilarious." The betting boards flickered with odds that would make a mathematician weep. Human versus Kralian champion, 1,247 to 1 against the human. The bookmakers had stopped taking bets after the first hour, not because they were worried about losing money, but because they were running out of zeros. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted gelatinous life forms," announced Vex'thara, the arena's primary commentator, whose four eyes swiveled independently to take in the crowd's mounting excitement. "Today we witness either the greatest upset in galactic combat history, or the fastest cleanup job our maintenance crew has ever performed." His co-commentator, a serpentine Thessarian named Velmos, slithered closer to the microphone. "The smart money, and by smart money, I mean all the money, is on Vex'thara the Bone Crusher, reigning Kralian champion for 6 consecutive cycles. Our human challenger." He paused to consult his notes with the deliberate care of someone translating ancient hieroglyphics. Zara Blackwood, occupation listed as engineer, height a laughable 5'6", weight classified as probably less than Vex'thara's breakfast. The crowd erupted in what could generously be called laughter, though it sounded more like a zoo during feeding time. Vex'thara himself stood in the prep chamber, all 8 feet of chitinous magnificence gleaming under the arena lights. His 4 arms flexed in sequence, each one capable of crushing a small vehicle. His mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. "An engineer," he rumbled to his trainer, voice like grinding stone. "They send me a human who fixes broken things. How delightfully appropriate. I will certainly break her." The trainer, a scarred veteran of a dozen species worth of combat sports, nodded sagely. "The humans have been persistent about entering our tournaments, my lord. Perhaps this will finally teach them their place." "Their place," Vex'thara agreed, "is several feet underground." Meanwhile, in the opposing prep chamber, Zara Blackwood sat quietly on a bench that had clearly been designed for someone with at least 2 more limbs and significantly more bulk. She methodically wrapped her hands, each movement precise and economical. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore standard arena gear that looked like it had been borrowed from someone considerably larger. She looked, in the words of one particularly unkind Vorthan spectator, like a child playing dress-up in her parents' clothes. The medical scanners had already completed their mandatory pre-fight analysis, and the results were being broadcast live to the amusement of everyone present. Human bone density, adequate for holding up a human, woefully inadequate for surviving contact with a Kralian fist. Human muscle fiber composition, suitable for lifting moderately heavy objects, unsuitable for combat with anything more dangerous than aggressive furniture. "The medical data is fascinating," Velmos commented, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air's anticipation. "According to our scans, the human's physical capabilities are roughly equivalent to a Kralian infant. A sickly Kralian infant." Now, Vex'thara interjected with mock seriousness, "let's not be hasty. Our computers indicate she could probably defeat a Kralian infant in arm wrestling, assuming the infant was distracted and possibly sedated." The laughter that followed this observation could have powered the arena's lighting systems for a week. Dr. Helix, the arena's chief medical officer, reviewed the scan results with the grim fascination of someone watching a natural disaster in slow motion. "I prepared the emergency medical bay," she announced to her staff. "Based on the projected impact forces, we'll need the molecular reconstructor and probably a very small shovel." As fight time approached, the arena's atmosphere grew electric with anticipation. Alien bookmakers frantically calculated potential payouts, most of which involved numbers so large they required scientific notation. Street vendors hawked commemorative holographs of the shortest fight ever, pre-printed with timestamps they expected to fill in within seconds of the opening bell. The crowd pressed against the transparent aluminum barriers, eager for the best view of what promised to be less a fight than a demonstration of basic physics. Gasping and clicking and buzzing filled the air as 47 species worth of vocal cords expressed various forms of bloodthirsty excitement. Vex'thara emerged from his prep chamber to thunderous applause, each step causing minor seismic readings on the arena sensors. He raised all four arms in a gesture of dominance that had been traditional among his people since they'd first discovered the joy of crushing things. The crowd's roar doubled in volume. "Behold your champion," he bellowed, voice carrying easily over the din. "Witness the power of the Kralian Empire." He turned toward the human prep chamber and gestured dismissively. "And witness the foolishness of inferior species who dare challenge their betters." The crowd ate it up like candy-coated violence, which, philosophically speaking, it basically was. When Zara emerged from her prep chamber, the contrast was so stark it bordered on the surreal. Where Vex'thara was a walking mountain of armored death, she looked like someone who had wandered in from a library and gotten lost. The crowd's laughter reached new heights of hilarity, with several species producing sounds that threatened to shatter the lower-frequency audio equipment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, introducing the challenger. From the backwater planet Earth, standing 5 feet and 6 inches of misguided optimism, Zara Blackwood. The applause was polite in the way that applause is polite when everyone is trying very hard not to laugh themselves unconscious. Zara walked to the center of the ring with unhurried steps, seemingly oblivious to the mockery surrounding her. She looked up at Vex'thara, who loomed over her like a skyscraper with anger management issues, and nodded once. A simple, respectful acknowledgement between fighters. Vex'thara looked down at her with all the contempt an 8-foot killing machine could muster, which turned out to be quite a lot. "Human," he rumbled, "I will make this quick. You clearly do not belong here." "Probably not," Zara agreed mildly. "But here I am anyway." The referee, a neutral centurion whose species prided itself on fairness and an almost pathological attention to rules, stepped between them. Standard arena combat rules apply. No weapons, no enhancement drugs, no outside assistance. Combat continues until knockout, submission, or death. Medical intervention will be provided if requested, and if there's enough left to work with. He looked meaningfully at Zara during that last part. "Any questions?" he asked. Vex'thara shook his massive head. "Only how long I should wait before requesting a stronger opponent." Zara said nothing, but the ghost of a smile touched the corners of her mouth. The referee raised his hand. The crowd fell silent with the anticipatory hush of 47 species holding their collective breath. "Fight." Vex'thara moved with surprising speed for something that resembled a mobile fortress. His first strike came in the form of a casual backhand that would have decapitated most smaller species. It was meant to be a quick, dismissive end to an embarrassing mismatch. Zara wasn't there. She had slipped aside with fluid economy, letting the massive fist whistle past her ear close enough to disturb her ponytail. The crowd gasped, not because the movement was particularly impressive, but because they'd expected the fight to be over already and were mildly confused about why they were still watching it. "Lucky," Vex'thara growled, and followed up with a combination of strikes that would have pulverized a small building. Zara avoided them all, moving with minimal effort, never quite where the attacks landed. She looked almost bored, like someone going through familiar motions while thinking about grocery lists. "She's fast," Crixtal admitted grudgingly, "for something that moves on only 2 legs. Speed won't help when she runs out of space," Velmos pointed out. "And the Kralian is just toying with her. Watch his form, he's not even trying yet." This was true. Vex'thara was fighting with the casual confidence of someone swatting particularly slow insects. His strikes were powerful but telegraphed, meant more to intimidate than to connect. He was clearly enjoying the psychological warfare, letting the human dance around while the crowd grew restless. "Stop running, coward," he roared, punctuating the words with a massive overhead strike that cratered the arena floor where Zara had been standing moments before. "I'm not running," Zara replied calmly, circling him with unhurried steps. "I'm observing. Observe this." Vex'thara launched himself forward in a brutal charge, all forearms reaching for her with deadly intent. This time, Zara didn't dodge completely. She let him get close, closer than any sane combatant would have allowed, and then she moved. Not away, but toward him, slipping inside his guard with precise footwork that spoke of extensive training. She landed a quick jab to his solar plexus, or what passed for a solar plexus on a Kralian, and danced back out of range before he could retaliate. The punch shouldn't have done anything. According to every medical scan, every computer model, every rational assessment, it was like throwing pebbles at a tank. Vex'thara staggered. The crowd fell silent. Even the commentators stopped talking, their prepared jokes dying in their throats as they tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Did she just? Krixtal began. That's impossible, Velmos finished. Our scans showed she lacks the physical capability to harm a Kralian. Vex'thara looked down at his torso where the human's tiny fist had connected, mandibles clicking in confusion. There should have been nothing. Less than nothing. But there was a dull ache spreading through his chitinous armor, and for the first time in 6 cycles of championship fights, he felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Uncertainty. Lucky shot, he snarled, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Zara said nothing. She resumed her circling, hands loose at her sides, watching him with the focused attention of someone solving a complex engineering problem. Which, in a way, she was. The crowd began to murmur, a ripple of confusion spreading through the stands. The betting boards flickered as a few nervous speculators began to hedge their bets, though the odds barely shifted. After all, one punch didn't change the fundamental physics of the situation. Vex'thara renewed his assault with increased fury, his movements faster and more vicious. He'd stopped toying with her, stopped showboating for the crowd. This was serious now, and he intended to end it quickly before any more embarrassing moments could occur. But Zara had learned what she needed to know. She'd found his timing, his patterns, the microtells that preceded each attack. More importantly, she'd found his weakness, not a physical one, but a psychological one. He fought like someone who had never faced real adversity, someone whose victories had come so easily that he'd never learned to adapt. She began to counterattack in earnest, landing precise strikes to nerve clusters and joint connections that shouldn't have been vulnerable to human strength. Each hit was perfectly placed, targeting structural weak points with surgical precision. The crowd's confusion was growing into something approaching concern. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. The human should have been paced on the arena floor by now, not conducting what appeared to be a masterclass in applied anatomy. This is unprecedented, Krixtal muttered, his 4 eyes tracking the action with growing disbelief. She's actually hurting him. Our scanners must be malfunctioning. Or, Velmos suggested with growing unease, we don't understand humans as well as we thought. Vex'thara's movements were becoming increasingly desperate. The casual confidence had evaporated, replaced by the frustrated fury of a bully who suddenly realized his victim was fighting back. He threw wide, powerful strikes that would have ended the fight instantly if they connected, but Zara was no longer where he expected her to be. She was inside his guard again, and this time she didn't retreat immediately. She landed a series of rapid strikes, each one finding gaps in his seemingly impenetrable armor, each one delivered with textbook precision that spoke of years of dedicated training. Impossible. Vex'thara bellowed, swinging wildly at empty air. You are weak. The scans proved it. The scans, Zara said, ducking under a haymaker that would have removed her head, measured the wrong things. She stepped back, breathing hard but controlled, and for the first time since the fight began, she smiled. Not the polite, mild expression from before, but something with teeth in it. You want to know what they didn't measure? She asked, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Technique, training, experience. The fact that I've been fighting things bigger and stronger than me since I was 12 years old. The arena fell completely silent. Even Vex'thara stopped attacking, caught off guard by the sudden shift in her demeanor. You see, Zara continued, beginning to circle him again, you made the same mistake everyone else did. You looked at the numbers and thought they told the whole story. But numbers don't account for leverage. Physics. The fact that your species builds muscle for show, not efficiency. She was moving differently now, no longer defensive, no longer reactive. She was stalking him, and everyone in the arena could see it. "Your armor is impressive," she said conversationally, "but it's designed to stop blunt force trauma, not precise strikes to structural weak points. Your height gives you reach, but it also raises your center of gravity. Your extra arms are intimidating, but they also mean more joints to target." Vex'thara's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. You cannot defeat me. I am champion. I am Kralian." "You're right," Zara agreed. "I probably can't win a straight fight against you. Good thing I don't fight fair." She feinted left, and when he committed to blocking the imaginary attack, she stepped right and launched herself upward with explosive force. Her fist, small and seemingly insignificant compared to his massive frame, connected with the exact spot where his jaw met his skull. The punch shouldn't have mattered. By every measurement, every scan, every rational assessment, it was like a butterfly attacking a hurricane. But Zara Blackwood hadn't been entirely honest about her background. Yes, she was an engineer. What she hadn't mentioned was that she'd been a military engineer, specializing in demolitions and structural vulnerabilities. What the medical scanners hadn't detected was the decade of military combat training, the classified hand-to-hand techniques designed specifically for asymmetric warfare. What the computers couldn't measure was the fact that she had spent 2 years studying every available recording of Kralian combat techniques, learning their patterns, identifying their weaknesses, preparing for this exact moment. The punch landed with the accumulated force of perfect technique, precise targeting, and absolute commitment. Every muscle in her body contributed to the impact, every joint aligned for maximum energy transfer, every ounce of momentum focused on a point no larger than a fingernail. Vex'thara's head snapped back with a sound like breaking thunder. His eyes rolled up, showing the whites, and his massive body began to topple backward like a felled tree. He crashed through the arena's reinforced barrier with enough force to trigger the emergency containment systems. Durasteel supports that could withstand capital ship weapons fire bent like paper clips. The transparent aluminum viewing wall, rated to contain explosions that could level city blocks, developed a spider web of cracks that spread outward from the point of impact. Vex'thara's unconscious form came to rest in the third row of spectator seats, draped across a group of Vorthan traders who were still trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The arena fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems and the distant sound of emergency klaxons. 4 to 7 species worth of spectators sat in stunned disbelief, their collective intelligence temporarily offline while they attempted to reboot their understanding of reality. Zara stood in the center of the ring, breathing hard but still upright, looking at her right fist with mild surprise. She flexed her fingers experimentally, checking for damage. "How?" she said to no one in particular. "That actually worked." The referee, who had been standing with his hand halfway raised to declare a winner, slowly lowered it and stared at the Kralian-shaped hole in his arena wall. In 30 years of officiating, he had never encountered a situation quite like this. His rule book covered knockouts, submissions, and deaths, but was notably silent on the topic of punching opponents into different area codes. "Winner," he began, then stopped, cleared his throat, and tried again. "Winner, by knockout. Zara Blackwood of Earth." The announcement triggered a cascade of responses that would later be studied by xenopsychologists as an example of collective cognitive dissonance. Several species began arguing loudly in their native languages. The betting boards crashed as their computers tried to calculate payouts that involved dividing by 0. 3 different bookmakers fainted. Dr. Helix rushed past the medical teams, heading toward Vex'thara and approached Zara instead. "Are you injured?" she asked, scanner already running over the human's relatively intact form. "Few bruised ribs, maybe," Zara replied, rotating her shoulder to test its mobility. "Nothing serious. How's the big guy?" "Concussed, several fractures, wounded pride," the doctor reported after checking on the Kralian. "He'll live, though he may never live it down." The crowd was beginning to recover from their collective shock, and the noise level was rising as different species attempted to process what they'd witnessed. The dominant theory seemed to be mass hallucination, followed closely by equipment malfunction, with a distant third place going to the possibility that reality had temporarily broken down. Crixtal was the first commentator to find his voice. In 40 years of broadcasting combat sports, he said slowly, I have never, that is to say, it's completely unprecedented. What I mean is... He trailed off, all four eyes fixed on the Kralian-shaped hole in the wall. Velmos, equally shaken, managed to pull himself together enough to provide commentary. The human, he said with the reverence usually reserved for natural disasters, has just redefined our understanding of combat sports, and physics, and possibly reality. As the initial shock wore off, a new sound began to build in the arena. It started as scattered applause from a few impressed spectators, grew into sustained clapping, and eventually evolved into a thunderous ovation that shook the station's superstructure. Zara looked around at the cheering crowd with mild bewilderment. This is weird, she muttered. The bookmakers were in crisis mode, frantically calculating payouts for bets that had been considered mathematically impossible. Several gambling houses would go bankrupt before the day was over. Others would make fortunes from the handful of lunatics who had bet on the human out of sheer perversity. As Zara made her way toward the exit, she was intercepted by a small group of reporters representing various galactic media outlets. They thrust recording devices at her with the desperate hunger of journalists who had just witnessed the story of the century. Miss Blackwood, how does it feel to have defeated the Kralian champion? Satisfying, she replied honestly. What's your secret? How did you overcome such overwhelming physical disadvantages? Zara paused, considering the question. Homework, she said finally. Lots and lots of homework. Will you be returning to defend your new title? Oh, I'm not staying, she clarified. I just came here to prove a point. Which was? That maybe next time, you should ask a few more questions before assuming you know what something's capable of. She looked around at the chaos she'd created, the emergency crews still working to extract an unconscious Kralian from the wreckage. Also, that human engineers are really good at finding structural weak points. As she walked away, leaving behind an arena full of confused aliens and one very sore former champion, the reporters scrambled to file stories that would reshape galactic perception of humanity overnight. The Nexus combat arena would eventually repair the damage, though they kept the Kralian-shaped hole as a tourist attraction. Vex'thara would recover from his injuries and even return to fighting, though he never quite regained his former arrogance. He did, however, become considerably more respectful of species he'd previously considered inferior. And somewhere in the depths of space, on various worlds and stations and ships, other members of other species began to reconsider their assumptions about the small, bipedal primates from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. Because if there was one thing the galaxy had learned that day, it was that sometimes the most dangerous opponents were the ones who looked like they couldn't hurt a fly. Especially when they'd spent years studying exactly how flies were constructed and where their weak points were located. After all, there's nothing quite like a good engineer when you need something important to break at exactly the right moment, even if that something happened to be 8 feet tall and supposedly indestructible. The moral of the story, if there was one, might have been about not judging books by their covers. But in reality, it was simpler than that. Never underestimate someone who does their homework, especially when their homework involves learning how to break things that aren't supposed to be breakable. And in the grand tradition of galactic sporting events, everyone agreed it had been absolutely worth the price of admission. Even the bookmakers, once they finished crying.